Obinna's days began before the cock crowed. At exactly 4:30 a.m., he would rise from his thin mattress on the floor of his one-room apartment, bathe with cold water fetched the previous night, and head to Chief Okafor's sprawling logistics compound in Ojuelegba. He wasn't just an employee. He was the engine that made the business run. He knew every driver's schedule, the cost of diesel, the client accounts, the market routes, and even the spare key to the warehouse. 10 years of sweat, 10 years of sacrifice, all invested in a company that never truly saw him. Every night, after locking up, he'd walk back home in his worn-out shoes, hungry and exhausted, sometimes falling asleep on the bus from pure fatigue. But still, he showed up the next day with hope in his chest. Hope that one day his diligence would be rewarded. It wasn't that Obinna didn't have offers to leave. Many competitors admired his discipline and begged him to come work for them, even offering better pay. But Obinna was a man of loyalty. His late father had taught him that a man's name was better than gold. Besides, Chief Okafor had once promised him, "Serve me for 10 years, and I will settle you like a son." That promise became Obinna's anchor. Through unpaid overtime, shouted insults, and weekends sacrificed, he endured, believing that on the other side of this, suffering was dignity and a fresh start. He had even begun drafting plans to start his own transport company with the money he was sure would come after his 10th year. He kept the designs neatly folded in a brown envelope under his pillow. But what hurt the most wasn't the long hours or the lack of appreciation. It was the silent suffering. There were days Obinna would fall sick and still show up to work. Days he'd forego his own lunch to help a driver whose pay was delayed. And yet, Chief Okafor never once said thank you. He would walk past Obinna like he was air, reserving his smiles and prayers only for his church pastors and high-paying clients. Obinna swallowed every slight, every insult, reminding himself that he was building something, even if it wasn't his. That was the tragedy. He was building a house he could never call home. Obinna's father, Panwankwo, had always been a strong man, a cocoa farmer who wore his pride in calloused hands and a weather-beaten face. But old age and untreated diabetes had begun to drag him down. The man who once carried yam sacks on his head now winced when he stood. When the illness worsened, doctors at the general hospital said he needed regular insulin injections and specialized care, something far beyond the reach of a poor man's pocket. Obinna became desperate. His meager salary had barely sustained his mother's blood pressure medication, and now his father's condition threatened to break everything. His heart ached watching the man who taught him integrity now cry silently from pain. Swallowing his pride, Obinna went to Chief Okafor's office with a heavy heart and trembling hands. He knocked twice and entered. Chief was seated on his executive chair, sipping wine and watching the CCTV screens with a half-smile. Obinna knelt. "Sir, my father is sick. I've tried all I can, but I'm falling short. Please, I'm not asking for a gift. You know my service. If you can give me a loan, or even deduct it from my final settlement." Chief raised his hand like a pastor about to deliver a benediction. "Obinna, you know I love you like a son, but right now things are tight. Let's commit your father's health to God. What money cannot do, prayer will do." Obinna's chest tightened. He bowed and said thank you, sir, though his throat burned with silent screams. That evening, Obinna walked out of the office, his face dry, but his eyes screaming on the inside. He knew what the company made. He managed the accounts. He saw the deposits, the bulk cash deliveries, and the lavish spending on chief side women and political connections. There was money, more than enough to save his father. But the man who watched him slave for 10 years had no intention of lifting a finger. Instead, he offered prayers, cheap, empty words. That night, Obinna sat by his father's bedside in the village, holding his frail hand and whispering stories about when they used to fetch firewood together. In the silence of the night, Panwankwo turned to him and asked, "Did you beg him?" Obinna nodded slowly. "And he refused?" Obinna didn't answer, but the tear that slid down his cheek said it all. The next few weeks at work became unbearable. Drivers whispered behind Obinna's back, mocking him. "Now you want die for this oga way no fit give you 5K to treat your papa?" One of the clerks, Johnson, cornered him one day in the warehouse and said, "Guy, you be fool. You get access to keys, money, fuel, and you day starve like goat." Obinna tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. The temptation was real. Every day he processed cash payments in envelopes so thick they could silence a man's conscience. Every week he recorded profits that could transform his family's life forever. Yet he returned home with only his sweat-soaked shirt and a flat wallet. Even Amaka, his childhood friend who sold second-hand clothes nearby, had begun to plead. "Obinna, this man is using you. Look at you, see your neck. You day fall inside pot like spoon." She cried the day she followed him to the hospital and saw his father gasping for breath while nurses argued about payment. "Even if not small you take, do, your father no go blame you." But Obinna shook his head. He remembered his father's words, "Let hunger finish you, but let no man say you are a thief." That became his anchor. He would rather suffer like Job than steal like Judas. One day, the devil tested him hard. The accountant mistakenly left an envelope with 750,000 Nigerian nairas, cash, in Obinna's care. It was meant for a fuel supplier. The accountant wouldn't return till Monday. Obinna held the envelope that night like a cursed blessing. His mother needed money, his father was fading, and he had nothing to eat. But as he stared at the money, he saw his father's face, not smiling, but disappointed. That image was enough. The next morning, Obinna walked into the office, placed the untouched envelope on the accountant's desk, and walked away. Nobody praised him. Nobody thanked him. But in heaven, perhaps, his father's name was not shamed. The 10-year mark was approaching, and Obinna could feel the weight of his sacrifice in every bone of his body. He had counted the days on an old calendar hanging above his bed, each red circle representing hope. It was only 4 months to go, 4 months before Chief Okafor would fulfill his long-standing promise, the settlement money. That money wasn't just a reward, it was his escape route. He had already sketched out a rough business plan in his diary, a small fleet of 2 buses that would operate the Enugu-Lagos route, with him managing logistics from behind the scenes. He dreamed of bringing his mother to Lagos permanently, enrolling her in a clinic for proper checkups, and finally giving her the peace she had long been denied. In his heart, he believed Chief Okafor would honor his word. After all, he had given him 10 loyal years, without scandal, theft, or rebellion. That had to count for something. So one Thursday afternoon, Obinna waited outside Chief's office after the weekly management meeting. When he was finally allowed in, he knelt respectfully, hands joined together like a pleading child. "Sir, I know you are busy, but I wanted to remind you that in 4 months, my contract will end. My father is sick, and my mother is getting weak. Please, if there's any way to release my settlement early, even partially, I will be grateful. I can sign whatever you need." Chief Okafor didn't even look up from the newspaper he was flipping through. He waved his hand like he was dismissing a fly and said, "Obinna, are you done serving me?" "No. When the time comes, we'll talk. Until then, don't bring this matter up again." The words were like dry sand down Obinna's throat. He remained on his knees for a while longer, hoping for pity. There was none. Chief didn't even glance at him as he walked out. That evening, Obinna sat alone under the mango tree beside the compound, staring into nothing. His mind was noisy, filled with the voice of his late father urging him to remain patient, and Amaka's words warning him that Okafor would never change. How could a man so richly blessed be so wicked? Obinna was no stranger to pain, but this was a deeper kind, the kind that whispers betrayal into your ear at night. His faith in the system cracked. He looked around and saw men who had stolen from the company being rewarded with promotions. He saw drivers who falsified waybills being paid off with silence. But him, the one who kept everything in order, he was left to rot in the shadows. Still, Obinna held on. "Just 4 more months," he told himself. "Then I can start my life." The call came just after midnight. It was his cousin from the village. His father had slipped into unconsciousness. The local nurse said he might not last till morning. Obinna's world collapsed in that moment. He stumbled out of bed, his slippers half worn, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. His mind raced as he considered options: borrowing, begging, selling something, anything. He called Chief Okafor one last time. The call rang unanswered. He sent a text message, not begging for settlement this time, but for a transport fare and hospital fee. No reply. Obinna rushed to the park and boarded the first night bus to the village, his eyes hollow with fear and fatigue. As the bus rumbled through the night, he stared out of the window, biting his fingers, praying that his father would hold on just a little longer. That maybe, just maybe, God would delay the inevitable. But by the time he reached the village, the compound was already filled with muffled wails. His father had died 30 minutes before he arrived. Obinna stood at the gate for a long time, frozen. When he finally walked in, his mother broke into loud, uncontrollable cries, clutching his chest and screaming, "Your papa waited for you. He waited for you." Obinna dropped to his knees beside the bamboo mat where the corpse lay. He didn't cry. He couldn't. His eyes were dry, but his soul wept with a pain so raw it felt like the earth had cracked open and swallowed him whole. He looked at the man who had taught him honesty, who had labored in the sun so his son could learn loyalty, and all he could think about was how that loyalty had killed him. If only he had stolen. If only he had cheated. Maybe his father would still be alive. The burial planning began almost immediately. Obinna sold his last belongings, his mattress, his phone, even his second pair of shoes. His mother pawned her wrapper. A few friends donated barely enough for a cheap wooden casket and basic burial items. Chief Okafor neither called nor sent anyone. Not even a condolence card. Not even a prayer. Obinna's heart had never felt so abandoned. And yet, through it all, he kept quiet. He focused on giving his father a dignified burial, one his spirit wouldn't be ashamed of. But deep within, something was dying inside him too, the last ember of belief that goodness was rewarded. He felt like a fool in a world that honored the wicked and punished the righteous. He buried his father, but he also buried his innocence that day. The day of the burial arrived with heavy rain. The clouds wept for Obinna because he had no more tears to shed. The village was full of mourners, family, neighbors, kinsmen. Obinna stood near the grave in a borrowed white shirt, his hands trembling as he read the final tribute. Just as they were lowering the casket, a convoy of 2 black jeeps pulled into the compound. At first, Obinna thought help had finally arrived. But when Chief Okafor stepped out in a white flowing kaftan and designer shades, flanked by 2 bodyguards, the atmosphere shifted. Mourners whispered and stepped aside. Obinna approached, unsure of what was happening. Chief did not greet him. He didn't even look at the grave. He walked straight into the center of the compound and cleared his throat. "Where is Obinna?" he asked. "He knows what he did." Confused and embarrassed, Obinna stepped forward. Chief raised a hand dramatically. "I have been informed that funds are missing, 1.2 million Nigerian nairas. And this boy is the only one who had access to those accounts before leaving Lagos. I didn't want to say this here, but I must protect my company's name." The entire compound went silent. People began murmuring. Obinna's mother collapsed from shock, and a few women rushed to lift her. Obinna stood frozen, his mouth open. "Sir, I don't know anything about that," he stammered, but Chief cut him off. "You are fired, Obinna. Don't ever come near my company again. You've already embarrassed your father in death." Then he turned and walked back to his car, leaving behind a storm of shame and brokenness. Obinna didn't speak for hours. He didn't help cover the grave. He didn't eat the food. He sat by the mango tree in the compound, staring at the wet ground like it held answers. His chest felt like it would explode. The humiliation wasn't just professional, it was spiritual. Chief had desecrated his father's final day with lies and slander. And everyone believed him because he was the wealthy man in a convoy, while Obinna was the barefoot boy beside a muddy grave. That night, after the mourners had left, Obinna knelt before his father's fresh grave and whispered, "They disgrace me here, Papa. But I swear to you one day I'll return here in glory." His tears mixed with the rain. Something inside him hardened. That was the night Obinna died, and a new man was born. The days after the burial moved in slow, painful waves. Obinna returned to Lagos with nothing but a worn backpack, his heart shattered and his spirit bruised beyond recognition. He no longer had a job, no home to return to, no money to fall back on, and worst of all, no father to give him the words he so desperately needed to hear. His name had been smeared with lies, and in a city like Lagos, where perception was stronger than truth, Obinna was finished. Word spread fast. Former colleagues, who once hailed him as Odogwu, now avoided eye contact. Some whispered behind his back. Others laughed openly. Even landlords rejected him once they learned where he had last worked. "I no day rent house to thief, oh," one of them said, slamming the gate in his face. Each rejection was another stone added to the mountain on his back. He moved into a shared wooden kiosk behind a vulcanizer's workshop in Ajij, the only place that didn't ask for identity or history. The floor was wet most nights, and mosquitoes sang bitter lullabies into his ears, but Obinna endured it in silence. The pain of losing his father and the betrayal at the burial haunted him. Every time he closed his eyes, he would see Chief Okafor's finger pointing, calling him a thief, turning him into a public disgrace at the worst moment of his life. His mother's voice, faint and broken from the village, would call him on borrowed phones. "My son, don't give up. Don't let their wickedness win." But Obinna had nothing left. No energy to even hope. He would roam the streets during the day, applying for factory jobs or errand roles, and return at night with dust in his shoes and shame in his heart. The worst part was that he began to believe the lie. Chief's betrayal had been so loud, so public, so complete, that it redefined Obinna's identity in the eyes of the world. He began to wonder if maybe it was his fault, maybe he was cursed, maybe being good was foolish. He sat alone most nights, staring at the ceiling, thinking of ways to end it all. He'd imagine walking into a moving trailer, or drinking something bitter and sleeping into the darkness. But something, perhaps his father's spirit or the memory of his mother's tears, would always stop him just before the edge. Still, his soul felt like cracked glass, fragile, broken, and dangerously close to shattering beyond repair. In that darkness, the only thing keeping him alive was the raw, unhealed wound of injustice. The thought that one day, somehow, someway, Chief Okafor would feel what he felt. There came a week when even hunger stopped biting. It simply became a numb, constant ache in his belly. Obinna hadn't eaten in 2 days. He had been walking the streets, shirt soaked in sweat, face dusty and sunburnt, his slippers flapping with every tired step. On one of those evenings, he found himself standing on the edge of the third mainland bridge. The water below looked still, peaceful, like an escape. Obinna leaned over the rail, staring down, imagining what it would feel like to just fall and disappear. No more shame. No more struggle. No more waking up to pain. In that moment, he didn't see suicide. He saw peace. But as he shifted his weight forward, a voice echoed in his head. His mother's. "Obinna, you are the only one I have left. Don't ever leave me alone in this world." That voice pulled him back like a divine slap. He staggered away from the edge and collapsed on the pavement, his chest heaving, tears running freely down his face for the first time in weeks. A security man nearby approached him, mistaking him for a drunk. Obinna said nothing. He simply walked away, dragging his legs along the sidewalk like a ghost. That night, he made his way back to his small wooden shelter and cried like a child. He wasn't just mourning his father anymore. He was mourning his identity, his dignity, the version of himself that used to believe in honor, service, and hard work. All of that had died. He was now a man stripped bare, betrayed, broken, and forgotten. If the world had nothing left for him, he thought, maybe it was time to start again, not as a servant, but as a weapon. Amaka was the first to notice the shift. She had been checking in on him, quietly sending him small bags of gari or sachets of water. But one day, she found him sitting outside the kiosk, staring into space with a strange calmness on his face. "Obinna," she called softly, kneeling beside him. "I know this is not you. You were never meant to end like this." He didn't speak for a long time. Then he whispered, "I was ready to die, Amaka. But I changed my mind. I won't die. I'll rise." And when I do, that man will kneel." She stared at him, confused at first. Then tears filled her eyes as she saw the spark of fire behind his brokenness. She gripped his hand and nodded. "Then let's begin," she said. "Let's fight back." The fight began not with noise, but with grinding, quiet, gritty, undignified survival. Obinna knew he couldn't get back up until he touched the bottom fully. So he did the jobs most men ran from. He became a bus conductor on the Oshodi Iana Ipaja route, screaming, "Enter with your change-o," until his throat ached. Passengers insulted him. Drivers slapped him. Thieves snatched his daily cut. But he endured. He cleaned Kiki Napep seats at night for 50 naira, helped vulcanizers carry tires, even swept parking lots. Every kobo he earned, he saved. And though people still called him the boy waste steel from Chief Okafor, he didn't bother explaining anymore. He had learned that silence, when rooted in purpose, was louder than noise. Every night he returned to the kiosk, wrote figures in a small jotter, and sketched business ideas with candlelight. He studied movement of goods, prices of fuel, and how supply chains worked. Even in poverty, his mind remained sharp, sharpened even further by betrayal. Amaka continued to support him quietly, sometimes sitting beside him and brainstorming names for his future company. "What about Ojemba Logistics?" she once joked. "You've been walking since." They'd laugh, but behind the jokes was real pain. Sometimes she'd cry when he wasn't looking, remembering the boy she grew up with, the boy who once stood in suits and managed a company, now barefoot and shouting in traffic. What pained Obinna the most wasn't the hardship. It was that Chief Okafor had won. He had not only fired him, but robbed him of everything. His reputation, his youth, his self-belief. And now the man still strutted around Lagos like a saint, attending church fundraisers, donating to orphanages, receiving awards for corporate excellence. Obinna would see his photo on banners and feel a slow burn in his chest. But instead of letting it poison him, he let it power him. Each day he carried tires or shouted for passengers. He told himself, "This is temporary. One day I'll own more than he ever touched." And even though he slept on bare wooden planks at night, he dreamed of office towers, polished floors, and the moment his former boss would bow to him. Not from fear, but from fate. The Lagos rains came suddenly that June, fierce, unrelenting storms that turned streets into rivers and zinc roofs into noisy drums. Obinna had just returned from a back-breaking day helping a bricklayer mix cement for a new bungalow site. His trousers were soaked, his palms blistered from the shovel. As he sat on the bench outside his kiosk to catch his breath, his phone rang. It was a neighbor from the village. "Obinna, your mama don collapso. She day hospital for you months." His heart dropped. He couldn't speak. The line went dead. His body went cold, not from rain, but from the cruel realization that life wasn't done testing him. His mother, the only person left who saw value in him, was now at death's door, and he had nothing to offer her but prayers and tears. Obinna begged everyone he could. He ran from bus parks to local churches, explaining that his mother was dying and needed money for oxygen and tests. But people had heard the rumors. "Na thief they beg," one man scoffed. "Go sell your conscience." Others simply avoided eye contact. He tried to contact old friends from a company, but most didn't respond. Those who did sent short replies like, "Sorry bro, things are hard." That evening, he sat on the bare ground under a tree in Mushin and wept openly. For a long time, people passed him by. Nobody cared. He was invisible to the world, a broken man in dirty clothes, mourning a life that seemed cursed. In that moment, Obinna didn't just feel poor, he felt erased. Desperation forced him to do what he never imagined. He went back to the compound of Chief Okafor. He didn't go to beg for a job or apology. He went to beg for mercy. He waited by the gate from 7 a.m. until almost 3 p.m. before the man drove in, seated at the back of a black SUV with tinted windows. Obinna ran beside the car. "Sir, I beg. My mother is dying. Please help me. I'll do anything." The SUV stopped. Chief stepped out with his head high, his agbada swinging. He looked at Obinna like he was a stranger. "You again? You still have the audacity to show your face here after what you did. Obinna knelt. I didn't do it, sir. Please. I beg you in God's name. Chief spat on the floor beside him and walked away without another word. The gates closed. Obinna was left kneeling in the mud, the sound of thunder rolling overhead like the laughter of wicked spirits. Amaka found him the next morning curled beside the gutter near the kiosk. His eyes were red, his shirt soaked in dirty water, his lips cracked and pale. She knelt beside him, held his face in her hands and whispered, "This is not the man I knew. This is not the Obinna who used to read books on logistics and dream of owning his own company." He didn't respond at first, but when he finally opened his mouth, it was a whisper. "He spat on me, Amaka. After all I gave him." Amaka stood, shaking with anger. "Then why are you letting him win? Why are you proving him right?" Obinna looked at her, confused. "You think suffering is proof of your innocence? It's not. Rising is. And you're going to rise, even if I have to drag you." That evening, Amaka returned with 2 loaves of bread, a sachet of powdered milk, and an old business ledger she had once used in secondary school. "Sit down," she ordered. "You'll teach me what you know about the business." "Everything." Obinna resisted at first. "What's the point?" he mumbled. But Amaka was relentless. She forced him to speak, to write, to calculate, to dream again. Slowly, something began to shift inside him. He remembered truck schedules, profit margins, warehouse fees, loading bay patterns, and fuel management hacks. The more he spoke, the more alive he became. Amaka smiled and said, "See? That's the man I know. The man who once ran a company without stealing 1 naira. For days they did this, building imaginary models, creating fake waybills, and mocking up invoices on scrap paper." Amaka would clap loudly when he finished a calculation. "Obinna the CEO," she'd shout. At night, she would place her hand on his shoulder and say, "When your time comes, let the whole world hear your name." It was the first time in a long while that Obinna believed he could be something again. Her presence revived him more than food. Her faith in him made him begin to question the finality of his pain. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't cursed. Maybe he was being tested. And if this was a test, then it was time to prove that he had learned something in those 10 years. Not how to serve blindly, but how to build with purpose. The idea didn't come with lightning. It came in silence, like a soft breeze. One afternoon, while watching a delivery van reverse into a crowded market street, Obinna's mind clicked. What if I started small, like this man? He had always thought too big before, fleets, terminals, warehouses. But now he saw clearly. He didn't need to start with buses or container trucks. He could start with something as small as local parcel delivery. Lagos was chaotic. People needed trustworthy hands to move goods from one end of the city to another. Dispatch riders were often careless, late, or overpriced. What if he built a company around honesty, speed, and transparency? The same things Chief Okafor never valued. Obinna raced back to the kiosk and scribbled ideas into his jotter. Trust Fleet Dispatch. He wrote the name down. The business would start with 1 second-hand bike, a branded reflective vest, and personalized customer service. He'd use local riders, train them himself, and handle logistics planning from his kiosk until he could afford a better office. Amaka listened as he spoke, and her eyes glowed with pride. "This is it," she said. "This is your comeback." Obinna was fired up. He approached a nearby mechanic and asked if he knew anyone selling a used dispatch bike. The man nodded. "One day. And 70,000. Obinna's heart sank. He only had 9,800 Nigerian nairas saved. Still, that night, he knelt beside his bed, not to cry, but to pray. And that prayer wasn't for mercy. It was for strategy. "God," he said, "I've suffered enough. Show me where to place my next foot." The next morning, Amaka surprised him. She had sold her small freezer, the one she used to sell soft drinks, and handed him 15,000 Nigerian nairas. "It's not much, but I believe in you." Obinna fell to his knees, speechless. He gathered courage and went back to the mechanic, negotiated for a down payment, and promised to pay the rest in 2 weeks. With the bike secured, he cleaned it with his own hands, polished it with engine oil to make it shine, and branded it using a homemade sticker. On the back, it read in bold red letters, "Trust is the speed." That was the birth of a new Obinna, not just the man who survived betrayal, but the man who would use it as fuel. Obinna's first week of business was a lonely war. He had no formal office, no marketing budget, and no guarantee of success, just a battered dispatch bike, a jotter filled with dreams, and a mawkish, quiet confidence. Every morning, he dressed in his branded, reflective vest, cleaned the bike until it shined like pride itself, and pushed out flyers he printed at a cyber cafe on borrowed time. He would go to stores, pharmacies, fashion boutiques, bakeries, anywhere that moved goods within Lagos. At each place he introduced himself humbly, explaining how his service would be different. Faster delivery, clear communication. No Oga, I day come lies. Most shop owners barely looked up. Some mocked him. One laughed and said, "Now this your one-man army, go deliver for Lagos." But Obinna smiled through it. Not from joy, from strategy. Because this time, unlike when he worked for Chief Okafor, he was building something for himself. The turning point came on a Wednesday afternoon, under the hot sun in Yaba. Obinna had just finished dropping his last flyer when a woman with a stern face and gold-framed glasses called him back. "Young man," she said, "I run an online thrift store. My usual dispatch rider disappointed me today. Can you deliver 3 packages for me before 5 p.m.? Obinna almost jumped. He nodded firmly and took down the addresses, phone numbers, and promised to report back by 4:45 p.m. He rode through traffic like a man possessed, dodging Danfo buses, crossing pothole-riddled streets, even helping one customer carry her parcel upstairs just to make a good impression. By 4:30 p.m., he returned to the woman, receipt book signed, packages delivered. She looked at him, impressed. "You're serious," she said. "Come back tomorrow. I have more for you." That moment, under the blazing sun, was the first time in years someone looked at him with respect. Word spread from her quickly. Within 2 weeks, Obinna had 5 repeat customers. Within a month, he was receiving referrals. Small businesses trusted him, not because he had a fleet, but because he had integrity. He always picked up calls. He never lied about ETAs. He greeted customers with a smile and even followed up after delivery. His slogan, "Trust is the speed," became a small echo in the community. Other dispatch riders began to notice. Some mocked. Some tried to poach his clients. But Obinna wasn't threatened. He knew that in a city like Lagos, where everyone shouted, consistency was the quietest but deadliest strategy. Every night, after he returned to his kiosk, he ticked his income in his old ledger. By the end of the first month, he had saved 86,000 Nigerian nairas. For the first time in years, Obinna didn't just feel alive. He felt seen. The moment Obinna held his first real savings in hand, he didn't think of a new phone, or new shoes, or even food. He thought of his mother. Her frail voice over the phone had become more distant lately, and each time she coughed, his heart twisted. "I'm fine," she would say, but he could hear the pain behind the lie. So he took 60,000 Nigerian nairas from his savings and boarded a night bus to the village. He hadn't been back since the burial. As he arrived in the early morning, villagers stared at him, surprised to see the boy they believed had disappeared in shame. But this time, Obinna walked with quiet pride. Not the loud, arrogant kind, but the strength of a man who had seen the worst and survived. When his mother saw him, she broke down in tears. "My son, you came," she whispered, her voice trembling as she reached for his hand. Obinna took her to the nearest private clinic, not the broken government one they used to depend on. The doctor ran tests, provided medication, and advised she stay for a few days under supervision. Every bill was paid up front. He even bought her new wrappers, a mobile phone, and paid for a neighbor to check on her daily after his return to Lagos. That week, Mama Obinna glowed like a new moon. She regained her appetite. Her cheeks slowly filled out. When she called him one evening from her new phone and said, "My son, your father is smiling wherever he is," Obinna wept silently in the bus park where he stood. It was the first time in years that his mother spoke without sadness in her voice. It wasn't just her body that was healing, it was her spirit, too. Before he left, Obinna took a quiet walk to his father's grave, the same one where he had been humiliated and fired. He stood there, dressed in his cleanest clothes, a Bible tucked under his arm, and said, "Papa, I didn't steal. And I didn't die. I'm building something now. Slowly, quietly. But it's coming. And one day, the world will call your name through my success." As he knelt to place fresh flowers on the grave, a few neighbors watched from a distance. Some were touched. Others whispered. But Obinna didn't care anymore. He was no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. He had survived disgrace, betrayal, and the threat of death. And now, with every delivery he made, every customer he served, he was rising from that very mud they had thrown him into. Not just for himself, but for the mother who refused to let him give up, and the father who taught him to die with dignity rather than live in shame. By the third month, Obinna had built a loyal client base. His dispatch bike now moved nonstop from dawn to dusk, and he had hired a second rider, a young boy named Chisholm who had once worked as a car washer. Obinna trained him personally, not just on routes or timing, but on values. We don't argue with customers. We apologize first, explain later. We don't say, "I'm coming," if we're still in Aja. Be honest, be prompt, be humble. The boy nodded eagerly. Under Obinna's guidance, the business grew faster than he expected. But Lagos is a city of watchers. One of his loyal customers, a woman named Ifeoma, who ran a boutique in Lekki, was married to a mid-level investor. She noticed Obinna's speed, his customer service, his receipts with handwritten notes like, "Thank you for trusting us." She told her husband, "This boy is different." 2 weeks later, the man requested a meeting. They met at a modest restaurant in Surulere. Obinna wore his only iron shirt, arrived 30 minutes early, and waited like it was a job interview. The man, Mr. Damola, asked him basic questions. How many riders? What's your daily volume? What do you plan to expand into? Obinna answered confidently, showing his worn ledger, scribbled projections, and a mapped-out expansion model. Damola was impressed. "You remind me of myself 10 years ago," he said. "You're not flashy, but you have clarity. I want to help you grow." He offered Obinna a soft loan of 2 million Nigerian nairas, no interest for the first 6 months, payable over 2 years, but with one condition. Obinna must register the business formally and set up a real office, even if small. Obinna agreed instantly. That same week, he went to CAC to register Trust Fleet Logistics Ltd. The money came in like oxygen to a dying flame. He bought 2 more dispatch bikes, hired 2 more riders, printed proper uniforms, designed a professional logo, and rented a 1-room office space at Alagamaji. The banner read, "Trust Fleet, delivering with dignity." Passers-by began to notice. He wasn't just another bike guy. He was a businessman with structure. And as Lagos clients grew more frustrated with unreliable logistics companies, Trust Fleet slowly became a trusted name among small business owners. Obinna's enemies, those who laughed when he was broke, began to watch in silence. Some even applied to work for him. He didn't gloat. He just smiled quietly and kept building. Because in his heart, he wasn't done. The final act wasn't just success, it was justice. And that justice was coming. Slowly, loudly, and painfully sweet. While Obinna was quietly building something solid from the ruins of his life, far across town, Chief Okafor's empire had begun to rot from the inside. Though he didn't see it coming. He was too arrogant, too full of himself, and too distracted by parties, side women, and political aspirations. His company, once a household name in regional logistics, had become a shadow of itself. Obinna had been the brain behind its order, the silent operator. Without him, there was no discipline, no structure, and no moral compass. The managers he once trusted were now inflating invoices, rerouting funds, and selling diesel behind his back. Drivers were falsifying waybills, clients were complaining of delayed deliveries, and suppliers were pulling out due to unpaid balances. But Chief Okafor dismissed every warning. He believed anyone could do what Obinna did. After all, wasn't he the Oga at the top? But the customers noticed. Within 6 months, He had lost 4 of his major contracts. One of them, a top cement distributor, pulled out publicly after a truckload was misplaced, and the company refused accountability. Another logistics partner sued Chief's company over breach of contract. Inside the office, staff morale dropped. Salaries were delayed. Bonuses were scrapped. Some began resigning quietly. Still, Chief walked around with his agbada swinging, barking orders, accusing innocent workers of sabotage. Instead of investigating his own house, he blamed spiritual forces, enemies, and even Obinna, claiming the boy he raised from the gutter had bewitched the company. He invited pastors to anoint the building. He held prayer vigils in the boardroom. Yet his empire kept crumbling, not from juju, but from arrogance and negligence. Meanwhile, Obinna's name was slowly re-entering conversations, not as a thief, but as a rising force. One evening, after firing yet another accountant for suspicious loyalty, Chief Okafor returned home to find an eviction notice at his gate. His Lekki home was under foreclosure due to defaulted loans. The shock nearly knocked him off his feet. He screamed at the security guards, accused them of plotting against him, and spent the night pacing in his living room like a lion in a cage. It finally dawned on him that everything he had built on the back of betrayal was now collapsing. But the worst hadn't even arrived yet. His pride wouldn't let him ask for help. He couldn't swallow the shame of running back to Obinna or apologizing to the staff he had abused. So he began quietly selling off assets, cutting corners, and preparing to auction part of the company to an anonymous investor he had never met, not knowing that the man he once spat on was the one buying the bricks of his broken house, one by one. While Chief's walls were crumbling, Obinna's name was rising like smoke from a sacred fire. Within 18 months, Trust Fleet Logistics had become one of the most reliable dispatch services in Lagos mainland. But Obinna hadn't stopped at small parcel logistics. He had used a loan and steady cash flow to buy 2 small vans, moving into corporate delivery services, catering to tech companies, medical supply chains, and SME distributors who needed same-day movement. His riders were uniformed, well-trained, and tracked. His back-end systems, run from a refurbished laptop, were updated regularly. He created a rating system where clients could give feedback, and he personally followed up on every negative report. What made him different wasn't just his hunger. It was that every client, big or small, felt seen. Where other companies gave excuses, Obinna gave results. His humility, paired with precision, became his brand. He started attending networking events, not in flashy suits, but in clean, modest wear, always with a jotter in hand. That caught the attention of several corporate professionals, including logistics brokers who had grown tired of the big company's arrogance. Obinna was their refreshing alternative, grounded, respectful, and hungry to prove himself. Within 2 years, Trust Fleet had over 15 full-time employees, including admin staff, customer care reps, riders, and junior dispatch managers. He moved the office from Alagamaji to a mid-size office block in Anthony Village. Newspapers began running small business features about him. One called him the boy who delivers more than parcels. He delivers hope. He didn't smile when he read it. He just folded the paper, placed it in his drawer, and whispered to himself, "We're not done. Not yet." In the privacy of his boardroom, Obinna began preparing for the final phase. Through a proxy business registration set up by Barrister Adolai, he began to monitor the sale of Chief Okafor's company shares. The rumors were true. The company was going bankrupt, and assets were being liquidated. Obinna didn't jump immediately. He waited, studied the books through public records, traced shareholder debts, and identified strategic weak points. When the time was right, he moved in, not as Obinna, the fired boy, but as a silent investor operating under an anonymous holding company. He purchased 35% of the company through 3 different fronts. The remaining shares were scattered among disgruntled ex-board members, most of whom were eager to sell to anyone who could revive the company. Obinna kept quiet. He let the pieces fall naturally. The board had called for an emergency meeting to announce the sale of controlling interest, unaware that the man they were about to hand the keys to was the same boy they all once laughed at. The day of the auction arrived like prophecy fulfilled. Obinna wore a crisp white shirt, black slacks, and no tie. No flash. No arrogance. Just power wrapped in silence. He arrived at the conference room in a modest Toyota Corolla, not the black SUVs his rivals used to intimidate, and walked in holding a slim briefcase and a printed portfolio. No one recognized him at first. His beard was fuller now, his skin healthier, his gait firmer. The room was filled with old men in suits, a few aging board members, and middle-level investors hoping to take over the once thriving company for cheap. Chief Okafor hadn't arrived yet. He was running late, as usual. Obinna took a corner seat and watched the room, his eyes steady. His name wasn't on the list of bidders. His company name wasn't registered either. He had orchestrated it all through shadows. When Chief finally arrived, disheveled, late, sweating, he tried to maintain dignity. His once bulky frame looked smaller. The agbada still flowed, but it hung loose on his shoulders. He offered fake smiles, shook hands, and whispered to one board member, "Today, I take my company back." He had no idea that the battle had already been lost. The bids were read aloud. A foreign investor group named Beacon Vine Holdings had offered a majority bid, clean, professional, and backed with verified financials. The board approved the deal unanimously. Chief Okafor raised a hand. "Wait, who are these people? Who is behind Beacon Vine?" The room went silent. The lawyer leading the session replied, "The new owner is here." All eyes turned. Obinna rose. The gasp in the room was like thunder cracking through the ceiling. Chief Okafor's face went pale. "You," he said, his voice trembling. Obinna didn't smile. He simply handed over a file to the lawyer, ownership document signed, sealed, and legal. "I didn't come to take revenge," Obinna said calmly. "I came to take back what I built, with my own sweat. The only thing you did was mock me and bury me. But I'm still here." Chief staggered back into his seat. No one spoke. The same board members who had once clapped when he fired Obinna at his father's grave now sat in stunned silence, watching a full-circle miracle unfold. Obinna turned, looked straight at Chief, and said quietly, "This time you'll serve me. And I won't spit on you. I'll give you what you never gave me, a chance. But not one you'll enjoy." Chief Okafor didn't leave the boardroom that day. He sat in stunned silence, his hands trembling slightly, his lips quivering like a man staring at his own obituary. His world had shifted in one instant, and not in secret, but in front of the very men who once hailed him as a king. The betrayal he once orchestrated at Obinna's father's grave had come back for him. Only this time, there was no public applause, only private horror. Obinna, meanwhile, remained composed. He didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. His power wasn't in shaming the man with words. It was in the atmosphere. The room now revolved around him. Every eye that once mocked him now watched him with reverence. And Chief Okafor knew that authority, that grace, that control could not be bought. It was earned. And Obinna had paid in blood, sweat, hunger, and shame. When the meeting was dismissed, Obinna met privately with the HR department. "I want all the old staff reviewed," he said. "Every person Chief sacked unjustly should be contacted. Anyone who still wants to return, bring them back." The HR director was stunned. "Even those who believed the theft story?" Obinna nodded. "I don't hold grudges, but I will make corrections." Then came the part that shocked everyone. Obinna called the operations manager and said, "Put together a new dispatch structure. Assign one of the motorcycles to the executive admin team. I want Chief Okafor placed as the dispatch rider for Category C accounts, those on the mainland. Let him earn a salary. Let him know how it feels to sweat under someone's command." The room went quiet. The instruction was typed, stamped, and executed. The next morning, a brand new reflective vest was dropped at Chief's house. It bore the Trust Fleet logo and the name O. Okafor embroidered in bold letters across the back. Alongside it was a rider's helmet, a pair of gloves, and a letter. "Your assignment begins Monday. Report to Logistics Room 2 by 7:30 a.m. Chief Okafor almost tore the paper in disbelief. He called Obinna in a fury, but the line was never picked. He arrived at the office 2 days later, hoping it was all a mistake, perhaps a prank or a final insult. But no, it was real. His name was on the staff attendance sheet under Dispatch, Mainland. His job was to carry parcel envelopes, pick up urgent medical reports, and hand-deliver signed documents. The same security man he once scolded now watched him mount a bike. The staff who once knelt at his feet now watched him enter through the side gate. And the drivers who used to greet him with "sir" now barely nodded. Chief Okafor's first week as a dispatch rider was one of unspeakable humiliation. He rode through traffic with the same bike model Obinna once started with no sirens, no AC, no tinted glass. Just sweat, dust, and insults from Kiki riders. His first delivery was to a former supplier who burst into laughter when he saw him. "Ah, Ogar Okafor, you do logistics now." Chief forced a smile and nodded. "Yes, sir. Company, redeployment." The man chuckled cruelly. Life no hard reach like this now. But Chief had no words. He swallowed the shame and handed over the parcel. Each day after that, he rode through gutters, parked in sun-scorched gates, waited in reception halls while junior secretaries ignored him. The same places he once entered with pride and bodyguards now welcomed him with silence or ridicule. The fall was steep, but Obinna didn't fire him, and that was the punishment. The real pain was not being excluded, but being included at the lowest rank. Inside the office, staff knew the story. It had spread like wildfire. Every intern, receptionist, and cleaner knew that the former CEO was now a dispatch rider. Obinna didn't speak of it publicly. He simply focused on growing the company. But his silence was louder than any speech. Whenever Chief walked into the dispatch room at 7:30 a.m., Obinna would nod from his office glass quietly. Never mocking, never cruel, just firm. It was the nod of a man who had once knelt at a grave and been spat on, and now stood in victory. Chief's former allies disappeared. His side women blocked his number. His church revoked his honorary seat. Even his family began distancing themselves. He was now the butt of memes, whispers, and pity. The punishment wasn't physical, it was social exile, wrapped in corporate uniform and helmet. 3 months later, Obinna took a weekend off and traveled to the village. Alone. No convoy. No noise. Just a man and his peace. He walked to his father's grave with a fresh bouquet of white hibiscus flowers and knelt down gently. "Papa," he whispered, "they disgraced me here. They spat on me. They called me thief. But today, the same man who stood over me here now carries my company's parcels in the hot sun. And I am not bitter. I am just grateful." He placed the flowers on the grave, stood up, and looked at the sky. The clouds parted just slightly. The wind kissed his skin like a father's hand. And Obinna smiled, not because of revenge, but because he had survived. In a world where good men often lose, he had won. Not with wickedness, not with shortcuts, but with integrity, resilience, and time. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.